Welcome to Orthodox Christian Television. My name is Father Christodolos. We're continuing our series on Chios, the island of saints. We're discussing the entire history of Chios, and to help us in this discussion again is Dr. Miljan Peter Illich. Welcome back, Dr. Illich.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
This is part 3 for those of you who are following in sequence. Dr. Illich, please tell us where we left off.
Well, we left off basically in the 5th century BC. And what I'd like to emphasize is that the story of Chios shows the amazing possibilities that a relatively small number of people in a small area have to contribute to civilization, to humanity. This is an area which is only about 340 square miles. It never had more than about 200,000 people, yet it had made so many contributions to civilizations, to Christianity, contributions which today countries with millions of people would be proud to have made. And many other Greek areas have made great contributions. This is one area which has made exceptional contributions, probably next to Athens, one of the greatest cultural contributions.
Next to Athens.
In Greek culture. In fact, in many respects, Athens was the pupil of Chios. Athens learned from Chios in art. We can start with art. Chian sculpture was really the first great Hellenic sculpture. We have, even in the 6th century, we have the famous Nike of Delos, which is
on the screen right now.
Right, that's on the screen right now, which shows like a winged woman, which became gradually translated into the Roman Victoria, and which became the archetype for angels, the entire image of Christian angels, what angels look like, derives from the Nike of Delos, which was Archimercus, which was made by Archimercus, a Chian sculptor, who was very proud to be from Chios.
That sculpture that we were looking at before was actually sculpted by a Chian.
A Chian, the legendary sculpture which has had a tremendous impact in the history of art.
His name again was?
Archimercus.
Well, we also discussed in previous programs how the Athenians learned democracy.
In many respects, they did that too.
They learned democracy from the Chians.
The oldest known written constitution, a set of laws that we have, is on stone. It was found early in the 20th century and near the village of Peloponnesian in Chios. And it is at least about 2,600 years old. And it's the first tablet of laws and procedures which we have in existence, where the laws come from the decision of the people, community, rather than being given by a god like, or a god king like the Code of Hammurabi. Right. You know, this is free people deciding on their own laws in which way to live under. And this is something which has affected us even today in America because...
well, we got the articles of impeachment that I believe this tablet that we're showing on the screen now that shows the Chian democracy or the legislature actually had articles of impeachment on the slabs that were found?
Something like very similar to articles impeachment. It provides if the magistrate, if the head of government officials
is corrupt,
are corrupt, take bribes. Very similar to the verbiage in the Constitution. Then the House, one of the houses, there were 2 houses provided for government, 2 legislative houses, one by the general populace, one by more limited suffrage of the upper classes. They would actually decide how to penalize and fine the magistrate who.
Let's move on because we don't want to reiterate too much of the last program.
No, that's true. To go further into art, we have the Examenus in the 5th century, who was an incredible artist. You can see right here, he worked with miniatures, scarabaeus in rock crystal, about 1 inch wide, and you can see that, for example, this picture of the man, almost 2,500 years ago, you can see a living, breathing human being. You can see his personality there.
You can see what people looked like.
Right, and you can see the character, expression of character, which is unmatched by previous art, like Egyptian sculpture or even Cretan sculpture before that, or you really couldn't see the personality. These were just...
It's almost like a photograph.
It's incredible, almost like a three-dimensional photograph. And he signed many of the surviving scaraboids, which is what we call this. He signed them...
These small pieces of art are called scaraboids?
Right, and he signed them with his name, and he put a number of them he added from Chios, from the island of Chios. He inscribed that as part of his pride that he was from Chios.
Interesting. Okay, what else did Chios contribute?
Well, we also have incredible contributions of Chios in merchandising, which is, Chios was actually a very wealthy community, and it was one of the first to organize international banking systems, international trade, which reached all the way from Egypt to Russia. And we have archaeological discoveries showing numerous Chian sculptures, amphora, which were like large vases in which to hold oil and other things. And coins, Chian coins are found everywhere over the Mediterranean, which resulted in the fact that the Chian people, Chios became the richest of the Greek states. Thucydides in the Peloponnesian War has specifically given us, asserted the assertion that Chios was the wealthiest of all the Greek states. Extremely wealthy.
This is in the 5th century we're talking about.
In the 5th century, extremely wealthy state, and a state which valued democracy, which valued culture, sciences, and also history and philosophy. We have one of the greatest of the historians of classical Greece was Delphi, who was Chian, and he was actually in the 4th century, and he was highly influential in many respects, which we'll speak more about him later. But he's in accord with the tradition of Chios.
The Chians are particularly religious people at this point. I mean, I know they were still pagans. Of course, they couldn't be. They weren't Jews, so they couldn't have been believers in the true God yet. And they weren't Christians, of course, because the incarnation had not yet occurred. But were they a particularly religious people in their own particular Greek religion?
Well, they were. They were actually. It's a very good question. They were extremely religious in the Greek religion at the time, and they actually built a great altar at Delphi, which was the center of Greek religion at the time, which it was encrusted with...
at Delphi on the mainland, in Attica.
Right. It was built by Chios, and actually there was an inscription to Chios on it, and the people of Chios had special privileges at Delphi because of what they contributed to it.
Delphi, where the famous oracle.
Or the oracle was.
Where all the great conquerors and kings and people like Alexander the Great went to get some kind of prophecy on their future. Mm-hmm. and what path they should take.
The Chios were extremely wealthy. Chios was extremely wealthy, but also it was extremely generous. At Delphi, they built a huge, beautiful altar with gold ornamentation on it and designs, and which still parts of it are still in existence and can be seen on the picture right now.
This is the oracle of Delphi.
Delphi, and in fact, much of the Greek religion derives from Ionia, of which Chios was a central part. In the 5th century, Chios was the main Ionian city.
Just to remind the audience, the Ionian Greeks were a particular tribe of Greeks that eventually settled in the areas of western Asia Minor and the eastern Aegean Islands.
That's right.
These areas, that was known as the Ionian League, or the Ionian areas of...
Approximately 3,000 years ago, and Chios actually took a leading part. For much of that time, Chios was the leading part of of Ionia. They were all independent states, but there was a league of 12 cities that eventually developed. And they actually had a king of Ionia, and very often the king of
a single king over this entire league?
Over the entire league. And the king was like basically like a religious political leader. He was like the chairman of the board, in effect. He wasn't an absolute dictator, but he was the dominant figure. And interestingly enough, that a number of these...
maybe, like a CEO.
Something like that, but it was basically a religious, combined religious and political function. And among the many other things that Chios contributed was that for the first time there were kings who were women. There were, from Chios, there were kings of Ionia who were women. We have recorded the fact that several of them were women, that
kings, women who were kings from Chios, or who were kings on Chios, or who became the CEO or the king of the Ionian League?
Of Ionia.
Of the Ionian League.
That's right, of the Ionian League.
Were they kings in their own right in some territory back on Chios?
They were not necessarily kings in their own right in Chios. They were the kings of all of Ionia.
Why were they called kings and not queens?
Because this is Greek tradition for a long time has called even a female ruler a basileus, a king. Even later on in the Byzantine Empire, if there was a woman who ruled, like Irene, who ruled in her own right, Empress Irene, she wasn't called empress, she was called emperor, or basileus.
I see.
You know, so this whole tradition started back in classical Greek days.
Interesting.
And
so some of the women who were picked from Chios to be the kings of the Ionian League maybe they were somehow religious leaders, and that's why they fulfilled that religious function at the...
Religious political function, combined religious and political function, and by the virtue of, usually they had to be of noble blood, and as a result of that, they were chosen for that purpose. So Chios also, by the way, was one of the first to develop, they had the gum mastic trade, the resin of the mastic tree, which actually at this period for the first time really started to be exploited on a large scale. And this
about what year?
This is also in the 5th century. We have some evidence that it was used before that, but in the 5th century, for the first time, we started large-scale exploitation and development of mastic resin, which grows. This particular kind of mastic tree resin is only found in Chios.
Well, let me explain a little bit for the audience. The mastic tree is actually called a skinos tree, S-K-I-N-O-S. The skinos tree, which grows all over, I believe, Chios and all over that particular...
Mainly southern Chios, mainly southern.
But
the one that we get...
The tree itself grows in areas all over Chios and all over the
But the one with
Aegean.
resin is just southern Chios.
No, but the same species, I'm sorry, but the same species only gives up its sap in the southern part of Chios.
That's right.
It's the same species that can grow across the street.
Right.
There's like a border where the skinos tree will no longer give up its sap. Once you're within that border, the sap can be cultivated. Outside that border, scientists are not really sure. There's all kinds of legends and traditions as to why outside that particular southern part of Chios, the skinos tree will not give up its sap. But you'll explain to us later what those theories are. But this sap was very valuable to Chios. Why?
Many reasons. That was used for medicinal purposes. It was supposed to be able to cure and prevent gum problems, for example, to treat liver problems and many other stomach problems. Also, it was used as a sweetener. It was used in wine. You know, at this particular time, Chios wine was extremely famous. It was one of their most popular products of Chios, Chios wine.
And they used it in the wine.
And
the mastic was put in the wine.
Mastic was put in the wine to give it a special flavor, which was also considered a healthy added ingredient.
I think the mastic of Chios was even mentioned in Columbus's log.
Oh, absolutely, yes. But much later, Columbus mentioned it, and he compared certain trees, mastic trees that he found in North America to the trees in Chios.
Well, when I read the log, it was almost as if Columbus was looking for treasure. We know he went to the search and he went on his journey of exploration, searching for treasure, basically, for wealth. And one of the first things he mentions in his log is not, oh, I see something that could be gold or something that. One of the first things he mentions is, oh, I see something that could be the Skinos tree. Maybe we'll get some of the mastic as we find in Chios. So it was a treasure that was worth going across the world for. It was almost like Columbus was hoping to justify the expense and danger and risk of his journey, hoping that maybe justifying it with having found some mastic in the New World. So that's how, even until Columbus's time, this is how valuable this was seen. So how did this affect the life of Chios?
Well, it was an incredible source of wealth. It added to Chian wealth incredibly, and it made Chios even more famous. And since it added to wealth, it also added to power, because wealth and power go together. Chios was able to, with all the earnings from its trade, including the mastic trade, it was able to develop one of the largest military establishments in the Greek world.
Now, just getting back to the mastic, why it was so valuable. We mentioned medicinal. It was used in wine.
Sweeteners. And also
cooking.
Well,
baking.
it could be used in cooking, but basically these are the main reasons: medicinal,
digestive.
Yeah, well, all the general medicinal reasons, sweeteners, and also in wine.
I think the sultans liked it because it freshened the breath of their young.
Well, that was many years later.
Yeah, but it was a breath freshener. It was a delicious chewing gum. Mainly, it was popular, I believe, because it was just a delicious chewing gum. It was the first chewing gum, long before Wrigley's and.
Well, it was right. It was chewing, and that was a way that the people at that time believed that the gums could be treated against diseases. There was a major problem that people would lose teeth at a very early age, and by chewing this gum, it was possible to, at least it was believed that it was possible to retain your teeth to an old age, and in fact, it seems to have worked in many respects.
Now, the word mastic that we get in the English language comes from masticate.
Masticate, which is to chew or gum. And,
very good.
And this is all related. So what we have is in the 5th century, we have Chios as center of wealth, center of culture, and also politically what we have is after liberation from Persia, most of the Ionian city-states were freed from Persia. We had Athens taking the lead among the Greek city-states. And Chios became the main supporter and ally of Athens. And in fact, Chios is celebrated in many Athenian works as the main supporter of Athens, Aristophanes, the birds, and so on. And it was extremely loyal. The Chians developed a reputation for being exceedingly loyal to whoever they said they would ally themselves with, contrary to some of the other city-states which we may mention. But the Athenians were extremely pleased with Chios for a long time. But what happened was that during the 5th century, as is Socrates, an Athenian historian and philosopher and statesman, said, Athens, which first took the leadership of the Greeks, from leadership, Athens passed into an empire. From empire, insolence developed, and insolence brought ruin. In other words, the Athenians became so full of themselves once they became an empire that they started oppressing all the Greek city-states that were under them, that originally joined them as allies. And Athens gradually turned the screws on them and began to exploit them economically and politically. And one of the last to be exploited was Chios. Athens started interfering with the trade of Chios, limiting the areas where the Chian traders could go, and it started preventing Chios from issuing its own currency, which was a very important way of assuring economic well-being and economic independence. And gradually the dissatisfaction developed in Chios more and more against Athens, but still for more than half a century, Chios stayed and remained with Athens.
Eventually, then
About
the blows.
about 430 BC, the Peloponnesian Wars started, and during that war, Athens became even more and more oppressive.
The Peloponnesian War was a war fought between mainly.
Basically, it was between Athens and Sparta and their allies for control of the Greek-speaking world, for the Hellenic world.
Okay.
And there was a bloody war. It was an extremely long war. And it was basically a draw for much of this time until Chios, finally the leadership of Chios decided that it was time to move away from Athens. And the final decision to revolt from Athens was made after Athens, more and more suspicious of Chios, ordered the tearing down of the walls of the city of Chios. And the walls of the city started being torn down, and Chios was really extremely angry.
Wow.
Finally, in 412 BC, the Athenian, one of the strangest people in classical history, a hero but also an anti-hero at the same time, Alcibiades. In 412 BC, he by that time had been driven away from Athens.
What was his name?
Alcibiades.
Alcibiades.
He was an Athenian from a great family, extremely wealthy, a brilliant general, and also had a reputation as being exceedingly charming and one of the handsomest men of his age. He had been in a leadership position in Athens. He was a general.
Sort of like a Julius Caesar of Athens.
Something like that, but really not as successful, not nearly as successful. And he was driven away from Athens because the statues of Hermes were destroyed or damaged in many parts of Athens, and an accusation was made that he was responsible and his supporters were responsible, which apparently is not true. But
So he fled?
So he fled Athens and he joined the Spartans. And he tried to organize more and more opposition to Chios and to Athens.
Right.
And he eventually came to Chios and addressed the assembly of Chios and urged them to revolt against Athens,
who was now their oppressor,
who
destroyed their city.
Had been their liberator and was now the oppressor. And Chios declared a rebellion against Athens. Immediately after Chios declared the rebellion, numerous other Ionian cities, almost all of the Ionian areas, joined Chios in rebellion against Athens.
Is this in the midst of the Peloponnesian War?
It was exactly in the midst of the Peloponnesian War. The entire complexion of the war changed instantly. Athens was in a panic, total panic. We have Thucydides, the famous Athenian historian,
Yes.
in which he tells us that as soon as the Athenians heard that so great a city, and those are his words, by which he said Chios, so great a city, has turned against Athens, had rebelled, that the Athenians panicked, and they knew that the existence of their state was in jeopardy because other states would undoubtedly join Chios.
Which is what happened.
And which is exactly what happened. And they did. The Athenians took the gold from the temple, which was supposed to be taken from the Athenian temple, which was held only for the extreme emergency of the state. Extreme emergency because the rebellion of Chios shook them up so much. They knew that the independence of Athens was in total jeopardy, and it was.
Mm-hmm.
And they took the gold, they built a huge fleet, and they built a large army. They invaded Chios. They actually made a major invasion of Chios.
In what year was this?
In 412 BC, they invaded Chios.
But how could they turn their back on Sparta in the midst of a war with Sparta and put, well, I guess they left enough forces behind.
The war with Sparta was still going on, but
they had enough wealth in the treasury and with the gold.
Well, they were holding the Spartans at bay by that time. The Spartans were not able to prevail over
But didn't they have to take
Athens.
some of their strength on the Spartan front?
They did take some of their strength, but not really that much. What they did was they used a lot of the strength that was not being utilized against Sparta. Like, for example, there were many citizens who were not in the army yet. So these were drafted. The Navy, mercenaries were recruited. Other city-states were coerced or persuaded to send more military support to Athens, those in the mainland who were still stuck to Athens. So it was a total emergency, and Athens invaded Chios, and it landed, the Athenian force landed in Delphi, which is about 15 miles north. It's a harbor about 15 miles north of the city of Chios.
Which is also a harbor. The main city of Chios is a harbor.
Right.
But there's a smaller harbor north.
Delphi, which at that time was a bigger harbor because as we know that due to erosion and geographical forces that
smaller now, yes.
It's a lot smaller now.
We're going to pick up on our next program with what happened with the Athenian invasion of Chios. I wanted to address the audience for some moments. Thank you for calling. People have been calling, but I don't want people to call and just give us praises. We want to call. We want to receive some calls with some criticism also. If you're confused, if we don't put up enough pictures, etc. Also, many people have called, but not one Chian has called. And I know there are a lot of Chiotes in New York, because I know a lot of you, and you haven't called to tell us if you like the program or if you don't like the program. If you like some of it and we can improve it here or there, please call us, Chiotes. And thank you, Dr. Illich.
Well, thank you.
For being with us again, coming back again, of course. Thank you for watching Orthodox Christian Television.